The envelope sat in the center of my desk like a ticking bomb. I know exactly how long it was there, 47 minutes. I watched the time crawl across the bottom right corner of my monitor, pretending to answer emails, while that plain white corporate sleeve practically hummed with bad news. Standard issue stationery, company logo embossed at the top, the same logo I'd helped sketch on a whiteboard 13 years ago when Mitchell Industries was 36 people crammed into a converted warehouse with leaky pipes and secondhand desks. My name was printed dead center in a sterile, sans-everything font the HR department loved for official communications. Daniel Brooks, Senior Director of Operations. Seeing it in ink still felt absurd. Senior Director. For a kid who grew up in South Detroit counting tips from a busboy shift, that title always felt like a jacket one size too big. I started at Mitchell in the mailroom, literally moving other people's envelopes. Now here I was, staring at the one that was about to erase me. Mitchell Industries had never really been just work for me. It was family, twice over. My wife Lauren's sister, Victoria Mitchell, had taken over as CEO 6 months earlier when their father stepped down. Richard Mitchell, the founder, was old school in the best and worst ways. Tough as nails, absolutely. But he knew every employee's name, their kids' birthdays, which ones were saving for college or a first home. He built this place from a modest machine shop into a $200 million operation by treating people like partners, not just payroll. Company barbecues? He'd be right there behind the grill, sleeves rolled, tie stuffed in his pocket, flipping burgers and arguing about the Tigers. Victoria was not Richard. 10 years in New York venture capital firms had turned her into a different species of executive. Where Richard saw people and potential, Victoria saw levers and line items. You could practically see the spreadsheet formulas running behind her eyes as she scanned a room. Asset, liability, replaceable, expendable. When she walked into the building, the temperature dropped 5 degrees, and nobody could quite explain why. So when that envelope landed on my desk, I didn't need to open it to know what it said. The signs had been stacking up for weeks. Meetings I used to lead suddenly didn't require my input. Strategy sessions that somehow never made it to my calendar. Budget reviews where my department's numbers were dissected down to the last paperclip, while bloated pet projects sailed through with a nod and a smile. And then there was Victoria's smile, the new one. The tight, polished version that stopped about an inch short of her eyes whenever she ran into me in the hallway. By the time I finally tore the envelope open, I already knew I was reading my own professional obituary. Inside was a single sheet of paper, no header, no warmth, just distilled corporate anesthesia. Mitchell Industries was eliminating my position as part of a strategic restructuring initiative. In recognition of my years of service, I was being given the opportunity to resign voluntarily instead of being terminated. 48 hours to decide between jumping or being pushed. I read it once, twice, a third time. The words blurred, but the meaning was crystal clear. 13 years of 60-hour weeks, of missed baseball games and skipped anniversaries, of building the backbone systems that kept this company from collapsing under its own growth, and it all boiled down to a choice between 2 different flavors of humiliation. The phone on my desk rang, making me flinch. "Daniel, this is Grace," Victoria's assistant said. Her voice had that practiced, neutral calm. "Miss Mitchell would like to see you in the executive suite. Now, please." I looked at the letter again, at the logo, at my printed name. By the time I stood up, I knew exactly what I was going to do. Victoria's office always felt more like a corner in some Manhattan hedge fund than the nerve center of a Midwest manufacturer. Floor-to-ceiling windows, glass desk, everything white, chrome, or aggressively minimalist. When I walked in 10 minutes later, she wasn't alone. Gregory Patterson, our CFO, sat hunched in one of the leather guest chairs.
He looked like he'd swallowed a handful of thumbtacks, uncomfortable, guilty, and wishing he was anywhere else. I'd worked with Gregory for 8 years. We'd been in the trenches together, late nights patching supply chain failures, pulling all-nighters over ERP implementation glitches, talking each other off cliffs during market downturns. Today, he couldn't look at me. Victoria stood behind us, her hands clasped behind her, staring over the city like a general examining territory she'd just conquered. "Daniel," she said without turning, "you got my letter?" It wasn't a question. I did. She pivoted slowly, her expression composed, almost bored. "Then let's not waste time. What's your decision?" I glanced at Gregory. He was studying his own hands like they were an exam he hadn't prepared for. No eye contact, no solidarity, just quiet complicity. I let the silence stretch for a heartbeat, long enough for my pulse to calm. "I'll resign," I said. If she felt relief, she hid it well, but there was the tiniest softening at the corners of her mouth, something between satisfaction and victory. "A sound decision," she said. "Gregory will coordinate the exit process. We'll need a formal resignation letter on my desk by tomorrow morning. I'll have it there by the end of today." That threw her for half a second. "That quickly?" she asked. I shrugged. "No reason to drag out what's already done." Her eyes searched my face, maybe looking for anger, maybe for begging. She found neither. "Very well," she said. "You'll receive an email from HR with next steps." I walked out of that glass box for what I thought might be the last time and headed back to my floor. The corridor felt different, heavier. People I'd mentored for years moved through their routines, completely oblivious to what had just happened 3 floors above them. Sarah from accounting passed me in the hallway, balancing a stack of reports. I'd pushed hard to promote her when the board wanted someone more seasoned. She was the reason our books were clean. Marcus from logistics nodded as he hurried by, phone pressed to his ear, probably fighting for a carrier discount. I'd gone to war in board meetings to keep his department in-house when Victoria's predecessors tried to outsource everything that moved. Jennifer from HR flashed me a tired smile across the bullpen. I remembered her in my office 3 years ago, shattered after her mother died, and how I'd arranged 3 months of remote work before remote work was trendy or easy. Not one of them knew that by the next morning they'd receive a sterile email announcing my pursuit of new opportunities and gratitude for my contributions. No mention of the weekends, the crises, the compromises. Just another paragraph in the company's weekly digest. Now, before I tell you what I did next, I need you to do something for me. If you're still here listening to this, if you want to see exactly how this plays out, for me, for Victoria, for everyone who thought they could erase 13 years with a single envelope, take a second and hit that subscribe button. Drop a comment if you've ever mixed family with business and lived to regret it, and tap that like so the algorithm knows people actually want to hear how this ends. Because trust me, this is the part where the story stops being sad and starts being dangerous. I spent the rest of that afternoon doing something I should have done years ago. I started pulling my company out of the company. Every system I'd built, every undocumented workflow I'd designed, every relationship with a supplier or client that technically belonged to Mitchell Industries, yet in practice ran entirely through me. I made a list. I knew which suppliers would extend 30 days of grace on an overdue invoice if I called them personally, because I'd drunk bad coffee with their owners in cramped back offices and remembered their kids' birthdays. I knew which clients would panic at any sign of change and need 3 phone calls, a site visit, and a customized implementation checklist just to upgrade a software module, because I'd been the one holding their hand through every glitch for a decade. And I knew something else, something I'd stumbled on 6 months ago during what was supposed to be a routine internal audit. A small, boring discrepancy that once I tugged on the thread refused to stay small or boring. While the printer hummed and my hard drive filled with documentation, I drafted my resignation letter. It was exactly 1 sentence long. I, Daniel Brooks, hereby resign from my position as Senior Director of Operations at Mitchell Industries, effective upon full settlement of all outstanding compensation, benefits, and contractual obligations as outlined in my original employment agreement dated March 15, 2011. No nostalgia, no thank yous, no it's been an honor platitudes, just a legal tripwire. At 4:47 p.m., I printed it, signed it with a hand that didn't shake, and walked it back up to Victoria's office. She was at her desk this time, scrolling through something on her laptop. Gregory was gone. She skimmed the page, her eyebrows pulling together as she hit the end. "This is minimal," she said. "You asked for a resignation letter. That's a resignation letter. Most people include a line or two about—"
At 5 p.m. on the dot, the same time I'd walked out of that building almost every weekday for over a decade, I stepped through the glass doors of Mitchell Industries with a leather portfolio under my arm. Inside were copies of 13 years' worth of documentation, key correspondence, and a neatly organized packet labeled Audit Irregularities. The interesting part. Lauren was in the kitchen when I got home, a cutting board in front of her, the rhythmic sound of the knife on wood filling the space. Onions, peppers, some kind of sauce simmering on the stove. The house smelled like garlic and normalcy. Upstairs, our 13-year-old son Tyler had his music turned up too loud. Bass note thumped faintly through the ceiling. I dropped my briefcase on the counter more heavily than I meant to. "I got fired today," I said. The knife stopped mid-slice. Lauren froze, then set it down carefully like she was afraid of breaking something that wasn't the knife. "What?" she said. "Technically forced to resign. Your sister gave me 48 hours to transition out voluntarily. I saved everyone some time." She turned fully to face me. I waited for the outrage, for the "how could she" or "what was she thinking?" It didn't come. Instead, I watched something else move across her face. Surprise, yes, but not disbelief, and definitely not anger on my behalf. "What did you do?" she asked. The question hit harder than the envelope had. "What did I do?" I repeated. "That's your first response?" She folded her arms, already defensive. "Daniel, you know Victoria. She wouldn't just—" "Wouldn't she?" I cut in. "Your sister, the private equity golden child who thinks human beings are overhead. You really think she wouldn't push out the guy who built half the systems she wants to modernize?" Lauren's mouth tightened. "You must have done something. People don't just lose jobs like yours for no reason." And just like that, a dozen little things I'd brushed aside over the last few months lined up in a neat, ugly row. The night she left her phone buzzing face down on the counter and practically sprinted back to grab it. The whispered calls she took out on the deck because the reception's better. The weekends at her sister's helping with Dad's transition that somehow never included an invite for me. "How long have you known?" I asked quietly. "Known what?" she said too quickly. "That Victoria was planning to get rid of me." She didn't answer. She didn't have to. I picked up my briefcase. "Where are you going?" as I headed for the door. "To talk to someone who isn't going to start by asking what I did wrong." I spent that night in a bland business hotel off the freeway, surrounded by piles of printed reports, my laptop, and a legal pad full of arrows, numbers, and angry underlines. I'd been poking at those irregularities from the audit for months, between crises, after hours, telling myself I was overreacting. I wasn't. This wasn't sloppy bookkeeping. It wasn't some junior accountant misclassifying an expense. It was a pattern. Regular transfers, 50,000 here, 75,000 there, quietly leaving Mitchell Industries accounts under the guise of consulting fees, specialized vendor services, software licenses for platforms no one in IT had ever heard of. Every transaction looked small enough to overlook, but stacked over 18 months, they added up to roughly $3.2 million. All funneled into a web of shell companies that, when you pulled the ownership records, ultimately traced back to one surprisingly familiar name, Victoria Mitchell.
And here's the thing, I'm not a hacker. I'm not some rogue data thief. Everything I had, I obtained through legitimate internal audit channels, logged access, proper authority. On top of that, tucked away in a fireproof box in my home office, I had the document Victoria probably didn't think about when she slid that envelope across the org chart. My original employment contract. Not the sanitized, corporate-approved template HR rolled out the previous year when Victoria started standardizing everything. The one from the warehouse days, when Richard Mitchell still believed handshakes meant something and legalese was mostly for banks. That contract was a dinosaur by modern HR standards, and for me, a gold mine. It included a profit-sharing provision tied to my years of service, an intellectual property clause that granted me partial ownership and post-employment licensing rights for systems I developed that became core to operations. A severance package formula that scaled with tenure, something HR had conveniently forgotten when they uploaded my file into their new system. By 3 in the morning, I had a complete picture. Victoria hadn't just fired a senior director. She'd tried to surgically remove the one person who both knew where the operational bodies were buried and had a legally enforceable claim on the company's past and ongoing profits. At 6:30 a.m., my phone jolted me awake. Unknown number. "Daniel Brooks," I answered.
Mr. Brooks, good morning. This is Patricia Hammond from Hammond & Associates, a crisp female voice said. I'm calling regarding your resignation letter. Morning, Miss Hammond, I said, sitting up and rubbing the sleep from my eyes. I'm reviewing the document you submitted to Ms. Mitchell yesterday, she continued, paper rustling faintly in the background. I wanted to clarify some of the language, specifically your phrase, effective upon full settlement of all outstanding compensation, benefits, and contractual obligations. It means exactly what it says. My resignation takes effect when Mitchell Industries has paid me everything I'm owed under my employment agreement, not before. Another rustle, a pause. Well, I've reviewed the employment file HR provided, she said. Your contract outlines standard benefits and a 2-week severance, which will of course be honored. That's not my contract, I said evenly. That's a template HR drafted last year. I never signed it. My actual agreement is dated March 15, 2011. It's still in force, and its terms are considerably different. Silence stretched on the line. I see, she said slowly. Can you send me a copy of this original contract for our review? I'll forward it to my attorney. She can send it to you through proper channels. You've already retained counsel? There was the first hint of irritation. Of course I have. A senior executive is being pushed out after 13 years of service. You didn't think I was going to search the internet for how to resign and call it a day, did you? Her tone cooled noticeably. Mr. Brooks, I should advise you that any attempt to use your departure to extract to enforce a legally binding contract, I cut in. You're advising me that could be a problem? I'm saying, she replied, clipped now, that Mitchell Industries expects this transition to be handled professionally. So do I. Professionally and in accordance with the agreement your client signed. If they want my resignation to be effective immediately, they can simply settle what they owe me. And what is it you believe they owe you? She asked. I smiled at the hotel wallpaper. I'll have my attorney send you a detailed breakdown, I said. I think you'll find it enlightening. We ended the call. I immediately dialed the number on the card I'd gotten the night before. Riverside Law, an answer went on. Sharon, please, it's Daniel Brooks. A moment later, a voice came on the line, calm, precise, the kind of tone that says, I bill in 6-minute increments, and I win more often than I lose. Daniel, you ready to go to war? She said. How would you like to take on Mitchell Industries? 3 days later, Mitchell's attorneys had their answer. Sharon's letter to Patricia Hammond ran 47 pages, not counting exhibits. It was less a letter and more a guided cruise missile. The first section walked through the profit-sharing clause Richard had insisted on back when he treated key employees like long-term partners.
For every year I stayed with the company after my 5th anniversary, I was entitled to 0.5% of annual net profits, stacked, not capped. 8 years beyond that threshold, 4% total, not as a bonus if approved, but as a contractual obligation, retroactive to the years the provision hadn't been properly executed. Mitchell Industries' net profit last year alone was $18 million. 4% of that came to $720,000. That was just the first item. The next section broke down the intellectual property clause. Any system or process I created that Mitchell Industries continued using after my departure triggered a licensing obligation payable to me. By conservative count, I had built or substantially redesigned 7 core operational systems that the company now depended on daily. Sharon ran the numbers on those 7 systems and almost whistled when she saw the total. "If they keep using your stuff after you're gone," Sharon said, tapping her calculator, "your licensing fees alone come to about $2.5 million. Lump sum, or we can structure it as an ongoing royalty stream, your choice." She wrote it down. Licensing fees, $2.5 million. Then we moved on to severance. Your contract formula is 1 month of salary for every year of service at your current pay rate. I was making $180,000 a year by the time Victoria shoved that envelope across the org chart. That came to $15,000 a month. 13 years, 13 months. 13 months at $15,000, Sharon said, put severance at $195,000. She added another line, severance, $195,000.
And then we hit the sleeper clause, the one no modern HR department would ever let out of a draft, the non-compete. "Standard boilerplate," Sharon said, flipping pages. "You can't work for a direct competitor in a defined region for 2 years. That's the part they like." She turned the page again. And here's the part they forgot existed. Richard Mitchell, in his old-school sense of fairness, had made the non-compete mutual. If they wanted to restrict my right to earn a living, they had to pay for the privilege. "Reciprocal enforcement," Sharon read. "If the company elects to exercise the non-compete, they must compensate the employee for lost earning capacity during that restriction period." She did a few more quick calculations. "Based on your compensation and market value, I'm pegging reasonable compensation for a 2-year enforced bench at about $450,000. Another line, non-compete compensation, $450,000. She sat back, pen hovering over the legal pad. "Added to the retroactive profit share you're owed," she said, "that gives us a grand total of $3,865,000. She circled it. Total outstanding contractual obligations, $3.865 million. Patricia Hammond called less than an hour after that breakdown hit her inbox. She didn't waste time with small talk. "This is ridiculous," she snapped as soon as Sharon picked up. "No judge in the country is going to enforce a dinosaur contract like this. These provisions are outrageous." Sharon's voice went perfectly flat. "What I'm looking at is a duly executed, notarized agreement bearing your founder's signature. It lists every clause we've cited. You're welcome to challenge it in court, but 'I don't like it anymore' isn't a valid legal defense." "That contract is 13 years old," Patricia shot back. "The company's structure has changed. Policies have changed. That language is outdated." "The company may have changed," Sharon said, "but Mr. Brooks never signed anything to replace this agreement. Without a superseding contract, the original remains fully enforceable." Silence on the line. "This is extortion," Patricia said finally. "No," Sharon replied, calm as ice. "Extortion is telling a 13-year employee to resign under threat of termination, then pretending his contract doesn't exist. What we're doing is enforcing signed obligations. That's called law." Patricia exhaled sharply.
Mitchell Industries is not going to pay almost $4 million to a single departing employee. Then Daniel's resignation never becomes effective. He remains on your payroll in his current role with the same access he's always had, including his audit authority. Another pause, longer this time. "What audit authority?" asked Patricia carefully. "Mr. Brooks is a senior executive with broad oversight. That includes delegated access to financial systems for internal audit functions. No resignation, no revocation. He keeps all of that. I'm sure your client understands that leaving a very unhappy, very informed insider in that position indefinitely is not ideal for anyone." "This is blackmail," Patricia said. Sharon actually laughed. "Miss Hammond, here's a little free advice. Before you throw words like blackmail around, you might want to take a very close look at Mitchell Industries' general ledger for the last 18 months. Focus on vendor disbursements, consulting retainers, and software licensing costs. Then decide if you want Daniel inside or outside those systems while this plays out." The line went dead. Sharon hung up and turned to me, expression sharpened with satisfaction. That, she said, got her attention. "You really think Victoria will cave?" I asked. "Victoria Mitchell is siphoning money out of her own company," Sharon said bluntly. "You've already uncovered a chunk of it. The last thing she wants is you wandering around the books with full credentials and a very personal grudge." "And if she thinks I'm bluffing?" I asked. "If she assumes I just saw something weird and overreacted?" "Then," Sharon said, "we show her you're not bluffing without saying anything we can't defend." She drafted the next letter that afternoon. It never used the word embezzlement. It didn't accuse anyone of a crime. It didn't threaten law enforcement or regulators. Instead, it calmly listed specific dates, vendor names, invoice numbers, and transfer amounts. Every entry matched one of the consulting fees and software licenses I'd traced to Victoria's shell companies. The letter closed with one elegantly neutral paragraph. "Mr. Brooks believes these questions regarding certain financial anomalies are best resolved in the context of a prompt and fair settlement of his contractual entitlements, allowing both parties to separate amicably and obviating any need for further review, reporting, or disclosure." Translation: "You know what you did, I know what I did. Pay what you owe, and this stays between us." The counteroffer came faster than I expected. 3 days later, Patricia requested an in-person meeting. We met in a glass-walled conference room high over downtown. Hammond and Associates logo was etched on the frosted door. The table was expensive, the water was bottled, and the tension was thick enough to chew. Patricia sat at the head of the table, a stack of files in front of her. On one side sat Victoria, in a tailored suit that didn't quite hide the tremor in her hands. On the other, Gregory Patterson, looking like he'd aged 10 years in the span of 3 months. Sharon came in with me and a paralegal who opened a laptop and started typing the moment we sat down. "Mr. Brooks," Patricia began, switching on her conference room voice, "we've reviewed your contractual claims and supporting materials. While we dispute some of your valuations, our client is prepared to resolve this matter expeditiously." Sharon folded her hands. "Let's hear it." Patricia slid a single sheet of paper across the table. $800,000, she said, paid in installments over 2 years. In return, Mr. Brooks will sign a comprehensive release, full non-disclosure, full non-disparagement, non-compete enforced, and a waiver of any present or future claims against Mitchell Industries. I picked up the paper. I didn't need to read it. Sharon had already predicted exactly this structure. Still, I let my eyes move down the page, then I set it back in the center of the table and looked straight at Victoria. "This is insulting," I said. It came out calm. That made it land harder. Victoria finally spoke. Her voice was tight, carefully controlled. "Daniel, we're trying to be reasonable.
This is a serious offer." "Reasonable," I said. "You pushed me out after 13 years and tried to pretend my contract didn't exist. Now you want me to take a discount on what I'm legally owed and promise never to say a word of any of it. That's not reasonable. That's cheap." "The contract terms are excessive," Gregory cut in, seizing the chance to speak about anything other than the elephant looming in the room. "They were drafted in a completely different era of the organization. Nobody gets deals like that anymore." "They were drafted," I said, letting steel creep into my tone, "when this company still acted like it was led by someone honest, when the person in that corner office cared about more than how fast they could strip value and move on." Color rose in Victoria's cheeks. "You have no idea what it takes to run a company at this level. You've never had to make real decisions. You've never had to carry that kind of weight." "I know enough to recognize fraudulent transfers when I see them. Weight isn't your problem. Paper trails," I said quietly. The room froze. Patricia was the first to recover.
"Mr. Brooks," she said, her voice low and careful, "I'm going to strongly suggest you avoid language that could be construed as defamatory." Sharon's hand brushed my forearm, her signal to let her handle it. "My client isn't making accusations," Sharon said smoothly. "He's noting that he identified certain irregular items during routine audit activity, items that would have to be satisfactorily addressed before he could ethically sign any document limiting his ability to report potential corporate misconduct." Victoria's mask slipped completely. "You wouldn't dare," she hissed. I leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Victoria," I said, "I gave this company 13 years, weekends, holidays, nights when my kid went to bed without me there. I built systems that kept your shiny spreadsheets from collapsing, and in return, you fired me through HR stationery and tried to cheat me out of what I earned. So yes, if you're asking whether I would dare to protect myself, the answer is absolutely." Gregory turned to her, panic flashing in his eyes for the first time. "We need to make this go away," he said under his breath. Patricia asked for a break and pulled Victoria aside. They stepped into the hallway and spoke in hushed, tense whispers for 5 long minutes. When they came back, Victoria's shoulders had dropped. Some of the fight was gone from her posture. Patricia resumed her seat. "Here is our revised position," she said. $2.5 million, paid in a single lump sum within 30 days. We'll waive the non-compete. You'll receive a neutral reference. The non-disclosure and release remain non-negotiable." Sharon looked at me. I held her gaze for a moment, then gave a small nod. She turned back to Patricia. "We appreciate the movement," she said, "but my client's contractual entitlements total $3.865 million. We'll accept nothing less than full value. If your client isn't willing to honor the agreement, we'll see you in court, and Mr. Brooks will continue in his current role with complete system access until final judgment." She closed her folder and stood. "So unless you're prepared to discuss the full number, we're done here." We were halfway to the door when Victoria spoke. "Wait," she said. We turned. 3.5, she said quietly. 3.5 million. That's the highest I can go." She caught herself before finishing the sentence, without making the payoff too obvious. She didn't have to say it. Everyone in the room understood exactly what she meant. Sharon looked at me again. 3.5 wasn't the full 3.865, but after Sharon's contingency fee, the difference in my pocket wouldn't be life-changing. The risk, the time, the stress of a drawn-out court case, that would be. It was, in every practical sense, more than enough. "Deal," I said, "on 2 conditions. It's in writing before we leave this building, and the funds hit my account within 14 days, not 30. Patricia's jaw tightened. 14 days is extremely aggressive for a transaction of this. "Done," Victoria cut in. "We'll make it work." And just like that, the fight was over.
The paperwork took 6 straight hours. Drafts went back and forth. Sharon haggled over every comma, every clause, every adjective that could be twisted later. The final stack of documents was thick and dense and ugly, but airtight. When the last signature was on the last page, here's what I had. A binding commitment from Mitchell Industries to pay me $3.5 million within 14 calendar days. A formal acknowledgement of my resignation, effective upon receipt of payment. A full release on my side. No lawsuits, no public accusations, no talking about financial irregularities. A comprehensive NDA that said in legal language, we never speak of this again. No non-compete. I was free to work wherever I wanted starting the next morning. 2 weeks later, I watched my banking app refresh. There it was, $3.5 million received. After Sharon's 30% contingency fee cleared, my balance showed $2.45 million. $2.45 million. For a kid from South Detroit who started in the mailroom, seeing that number in my account didn't feel real. I stared at the screen for what must have been 10 minutes, waiting for it to disappear, waiting for some error message to flash. It never did. But that wasn't the end of the story. 3 months after I walked out of Mitchell Industries for the last time, a headline popped up in my news feed. Mitchell Industries under SEC investigation for financial irregularities. According to the article, an anonymous whistleblower had provided federal regulators with a detailed packet of information, transaction histories, shell company registrations, flowcharts of money moving where it shouldn't, the kind of packet that doesn't come from a casual observer. Now, I want to be crystal clear about something. My NDA prohibited me from disclosing anything to outside parties. I honored that agreement completely. What I discovered during my internal audit, however, existed in multiple places within the company's systems. Other people had access. Other people could have noticed the same patterns I did once they knew where to look. And Victoria made a lot of enemies during her brief, brutal tenure. I'll never know exactly who finally pulled the trigger, but I have my suspicions. 6 weeks after the initial story broke, another headline appeared. Mitchell Industries CEO Victoria Mitchell arrested on fraud and embezzlement charges. The investigation ultimately found that what I'd discovered, the $3.2 million, was just part of a larger pattern. Over roughly 2 years, Victoria had skimmed close to $5 million out of the company through increasingly complex schemes. She pled out rather than go to trial. Multiple counts, federal time. Last I heard, she's serving an 8-year sentence.
Richard Mitchell came out of retirement to stop the bleeding and try to salvage the company his daughter had nearly destroyed. A few weeks into his return, my phone rang. "Daniel," he said, his voice heavier than I'd ever heard it. "It's Richard." "Mr. Mitchell," I said, "it's good to hear from you." "I've been catching up," he said, "on everything. What Victoria did to the company, what she did to you." He exhaled, a rough, tired sound. "I'm sorry," he said. "I never should have handed her the keys without better guardrails. I thought I was giving her an opportunity to prove herself. I didn't see what she'd become." "It's not your fault," I said. "You couldn't have known." "I also heard about your settlement," he said. "That contract language was smart. You used it well." "I learned from you," I said. "You're the one who drilled 'get it in writing' into my head back when we were still in that old warehouse with the leaky pipes. Remember?" He let out a sad, genuine laugh. "True enough," he said. "Listen, I'm rebuilding the leadership team, cleaning house. I don't know where you are in your life right now, but if you ever wanted to come back—" "I appreciate that more than you know," I said, and I meant it. "But I've started something of my own, a consultancy. I help companies build operational systems that actually work without burning out the people who run them. Turns out there's a real need." "That's good, Daniel. That's really good. For what it's worth, you were one of the best people I ever hired. I'm sorry my daughter couldn't see that." "Thank you," I said quietly. We said goodbye.
As for Lauren, there are some things money doesn't fix. The truth came out over the following months, not in court filings, but in text messages and emails, and a few tearful confessions she probably wished she'd kept to herself. She hadn't just known what Victoria was planning, she'd helped. She'd sat in on strategy discussions about how to manage me out quietly. She'd listened while her sister outlined ways to sidestep my contract and minimize the payout. She'd comforted me at home while forwarding my reactions back to Victoria, keeping her sister informed about my state of mind. When I finally confronted her with what I knew, she didn't even try to deny it. She just sat there at our kitchen table, the same table where we'd shared 1,000 dinners, and said, "She's my sister, Daniel. What was I supposed to do?" As if that explained everything. As if blood meant she had permission to betray the man she'd promised to spend her life with. We separated 6 months after I left Mitchell Industries. The divorce was calm, civilized, and absolutely final. Tyler was 14 by then, old enough to understand who did what to whom, old enough to read the situation clearly and draw his own conclusions without anyone poisoning his opinion. We agreed on joint custody. He chose to spend most of his time with me. Some nights, after he's gone to bed and the house is quiet, I think about how close I came to losing everything. Not just the money, but my sense of self, the belief that I mattered beyond what I could produce for someone else's bottom line. Victoria tried to erase me. Lauren tried to help her do it. And for a few dark hours in that hotel room, surrounded by documents and legal pads and the wreckage of my career, I wondered if they were right, if maybe I really was just overhead, just a line item waiting to be cut. But then I remembered the warehouse, the leaky pipes, the second-hand desks, the years of building something real with people who believed in it. And I decided to fight. The consulting firm I launched has exceeded every projection I wrote on that first nervous business plan. It turns out I spent 13 years building the operational backbone of a $200 million manufacturer is a pretty compelling line on a pitch deck. So is, I know how to make your systems work without breaking your people. I landed my first client 2 weeks after I officially launched, then another, then referrals started coming faster than I could handle. Within a year, I was turning down projects I would have killed for when I was still inside a corporate cage, begging for recognition. Last week, my phone lit up with a familiar name, Gregory Patterson. "Daniel," he said, sounding more relaxed than I'd ever heard him. "I'm with a new outfit now, another manufacturing group, smaller but growing fast. They've got the same growth problems Mitchell had 5 years ago, and none of the systems to handle them. We need someone to rebuild the whole operations structure from the ground up. Interested?" He hesitated. "I know things ended badly over there." "Gregory," I cut him off gently. "Things didn't end badly. They ended exactly how they needed to end. Send me the details." Because here's the thing about being forced out, about being told you're disposable, about being treated like a cost center that can be eliminated with a form letter and a 48-hour deadline. It can feel like the end of the road, but sometimes it isn't an ending at all. Sometimes it's the one violent shove you needed to finally see what you're actually worth. Victoria thought she was getting rid of a problem. In her mind, she was kicking out the one person who might connect the dots on her embezzlement scheme and bring the whole thing crashing down. What she actually did was push me into valuing myself properly for the first time in years, into reading my own contract like it mattered, into realizing that I've been running million-dollar systems on a fraction of their worth and calling it loyalty. That one-sentence resignation letter, the one I drafted in about 5 minutes with a pounding heart and shaking hands, it turned out to be the smartest thing I've ever written. It locked my exit to full payment. It forced them to acknowledge every obligation they'd tried to paper over, and it gave me the leverage I needed to walk away not just with my dignity intact, but with the financial runway to build an entirely new life on my own terms. So if you're still watching this and you're stuck in a job where you're ignored, underpaid, or quietly being pushed toward the door, hear this. Know your value. Don't wait for a crisis to figure out what you really bring to the table. Start documenting it now. Know your paperwork, contracts, policies, offer letters, equity agreements. Read them like your future depends on them, because someday it might. Know your boundaries. No paycheck is worth letting someone erase your rights or rewrite your story without your consent. A resignation letter doesn't have to be a surrender. Done right, it can be the first step in finally getting what you're truly owed, by your employer, by your industry, and by yourself. If this story resonated with you, if you're thinking about your own exit and want to make sure you don't leave money or leverage on the table, hit subscribe. Drop your own experience in the comments. Share this with anyone who's ever been told they're no longer a fit for a company they helped build. Their story might not be over. It might be just about to get good.